kind of memorial, with some kind of booth or some type of monument. We can't let this go by. It's bad to be awake while reason is still sleeping. Some of us have had that experience many times. Being awake, reason is still asleep. We've all been there. And Luke seems to suggest that that's what was going on with Peter. But I would like to inquire as to why Peter's suggestion was such a bad idea. I mean, there are examples in the Old Testament of monuments being set up where significant things happened. Bethel is a good example. Gilgal is a good example. We're going to return to that question in a little while. Why was Peter's suggestion such a poor idea? The upshot of the text is that Luke wants his readers to see Jesus' continuity with these Old Testament characters. Luke wants his readers to recognize that Jesus was in line directly with Elijah and with Moses. That he was the fulfillment, really, of everything that they stood for. Luke also wants the readers to overhear that divine voice from heaven that says, "This is my Son. Listen to him." Luke wants the readers to recognize that in the story. Once they descend from the mountain, they are beset with problems. They get down, they come down the mountain, and the other disciples, those who did not climb Mount Tabor with Jesus, they have failed to exorcise a demon from this young boy. Jesus is quite annoyed at the feebleness of the disciples' faith, and he takes care of the situation, but clearly he is frustrated that even his closest followers are not getting it. They're not getting it. They're not understanding. Now, let's step back from the story itself, from the text, and see if we can find some clues to the meaning of the overall story. In order to do that, we have to step back. We have to look at it from a broader perspective. It seems clear to me that what happens off of the mountain, once they come down from the mountain, what happens there is all about powerlessness. The disciples are not able to take care of this situation. Now, we know that what happened on the mountain was not about marking off holy ground and somehow establishing a shrine for pilgrims to come and visit. We know that without question. Apparently, what happened on top of the mountain was about empowerment for the disciples. It seems the logical conclusion when you look at the entire story is that Luke wants readers to see that it was a time of empowerment. They were to see the divine light, they were to hear the divine voice, and they were to carry the divine power with them off of the mountain. It appears to me that that's what the story is about. As I have suggested before, when I have preached from the book of Luke, even earlier this year, that there is a kind of rhythm in the Gospel of Luke between highs and lows, between lots of action and very little action. In this case, we're talking about literal highs and lows. There's something about the texture of the text itself that helps the reader connect the dots. And that's what we want to do. We want to understand exactly what's being communicated here, and the sharp contrast, I think, between what happens on the mountain and the problems that are faced at the foot of the mountain That's what it's about, the contrast. In many ways, it reminds me of how churches are. As someone who has been involved with and has observed churches for a good long while, I recognize that all churches have their good times and their bad times. It's a reality. All churches have periods of growth and harvest. And I think all of them have some stretches. If they're on this, if they're active long enough, they have some long stretches of seeming barrenness. It's just the nature of the reality of the church. I recall as a young pastor reading a book by Robert Dale entitled To Dream Again. Maybe some of you read the book or have been exposed to it somehow. It's about 30 years old now. But I remember reading it, and I remember being so grateful for it, because in it he identified and he explained the typical life cycle of a congregation. Very few churches have a trajectory of uninterrupted growth and health. Let me say that again. Very few churches have a trajectory or a graph of uninterrupted growth and health. For most churches, the graph looks like kind of a bowl turned upside down. Now, this one's a little different here, and I'm going to explain this to you. This is a healthy congregational life cycle. This is what growth looks like in a healthy church. Let's look at the different parts of it. You have the birth of a church, and usually following the birth of the church, there is a sharp increase in growth. Okay, it happens. I mean, if you've ever been a part of a church plant, or if you have followed a church plant, been a part of supporting one, whatever the case might be, there's a period of sharp growth immediately following the birth of that church. Well, after a while, now remember, this is a healthy church, there's a period of stable growth. You see how that the curve flattens out just a little bit, and this is not to scale, so I really can't suggest to you how many years we're talking about here, but notice the inevitability of some kind of decline. What happens is the new wears off, or maybe the church begins to feel that they're just sort of recycling year after year after year, and there's some kind of slight decline that occurs. In a healthy congregation, there is some kind of intervention. There's a process of renewal. There's an experience of revival. There is a sense of re-dreaming, the dream that brought the church into existence to begin with, and so with an intervention, there is a return to growth. The idea is where the decline begins, a church has to pay attention. A church has to have their eye on the ball and be ready to take some steps of action for renewal. And so this is a good congregation. This is a